Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first episode of Titletown Talk. I'm your host, Ian Ewing. On the first ever episode of Titletown Talk, we're going to talk about the season that was for the Green Bay Packers. We're going to recap that up and down season that we saw fresh off the wild card loss to the Philadelphia Eagles. Boy, oh boy, was it a frustrating game. I feel like it's hard to deny that we all kind of felt like it was coming, rolling. They shut out the Saints. They beat the Seahawks. They had a really good little run there at the end. And then they hit a freight train when they played the Vikings. I really did think they were going to beat the Vikings. I thought that actually went comfortably. And then, they had the Bears. Felt like they could come back and beat them up pretty bad and get some momentum. But, Tucker Kraft said it best. Everybody could just kind of feel like it really just wasn't their year. I know all the talk right now in the fan base is whether or not this was a step back or a failure compared to last year. So we're going to talk about that on today's episode and compare 2023 to 2024 a little bit. Before I begin, I understand why it feels like a step back. Obviously, let's talk about 2023 for a second. 23 was a year, it was a rebuild, right? It was one of those situations where we kind of just felt like it was house money. That was what was thrown around all season, right? House money. Oh, we just want to see progress, blah, 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 whatever your word for it was. For me personally, I went into last year saying, as long as we know that Jordan's the guy at the end of the season, everything else doesn't really matter. The second thing I said was if we can get rid of Joe Barry, which I feel like everybody felt the same way as I did on that, and get a new defensive coordinator coming into 24, we were going to roll. I think it's safe to say Jordan showed he was the guy at the end of last season. And it also, that ended up being correct too. Joe Barry was kicked out despite actually a pretty strong finish by the defense. I thought they massively outplayed the 49ers offense except for a few missed tackles. Darnell Savage, dropped picks by Darnell Savage, who's not even on the team anymore. So going back to what I said, I know this feels like a step back, but it definitely wasn't. So again, a 3-game winning streak at the end of 2023. Panthers, Vikings, Bears, and they looked phenomenal in those games. I think the defense looked pretty bad against the Panthers, but there was a ton of progress. Going into the Cowboys game last year, I was like, wow, there's no chance they're going to beat this team. Real quick, I know everybody wants to pretend like, oh, the Cowboys sucked. There was a bad team there, and yeah, so what? They blew out the Cowboys. That Cowboys team is really good, and anybody who wants to look back, look at all the picks for that game. Not a soul in the planet picked the Packers to beat the Cowboys. And then we went into the 49ers game, and everyone was like, oh, there's no way the Packers are going to beat the 49ers. Not being a homer here, but I felt like the Packers outplayed the 49ers that entire game. You guys can let me know in the comments if you agree or not, but I think they should have won that game. They outplayed them for the majority of the game. Anyway, let's talk about 2024. Like I said, I know it feels like a bit of a step back because we didn't get as far as last year, but this team improved dramatically in basically every area. Let's talk about offense first. We finished 5th in offense, 371 yards per game. Points per game, we finished 8th in the NFL, 27.1. Defensively, which we'll talk about in a bit, oh boy, what an improvement. Defensively, 315 yards per game allowed by the defense and only 19.9 points per game. That's 5th and 6th in the NFL. The point differential, 460 to 338, dramatic improvement there. One thing I will say, too, that I don't know if you all have looked at expected wins or not. It's basically just like historic win-loss with the point differential that they had. They were projected to be a 12 to 13 win team, and they won 11. So they actually were a little bit behind that, but the quality of the team was there, and you could see it in their point differential. Let's talk about DVOA. Some of you might know what DVOA is. If you don't, it's defense adjusted value over average. It is basically my favorite way to judge statistics. And basically, the Packers were the number 3 team in the entire NFL in DVOA. Last year, they were 13th. So what is DVOA? It's a ranking system, I would call it a better ranking system compared to traditional stats. It weighs in the quality of your opponent versus just not having any context at all. So I'll give you an example. In 2005, the Packers had the number 1 passing defense in the entire season. But that didn't take into account the fact that, let's just talk about it, be honest. You guys might remember 2005. 29 picks from Brett Favre, 4-12 season. That season, they were the number 1 pass defense until the last week. And everybody knows why. They were behind in every single game, right? So the other team just had to run the whole time. They didn't have to pass. So again, DVOA weighs in context. So if the defense that they played was really, really good and they scored 40 points, that's going to look really good in DVOA. If you score 40 points against the 32nd ranked team in the NFL, it's not going to score as high. So DVOA, great measuring stick. Number 3 this year in DVOA. That was above the Eagles, above the Vikings, above many other teams, above the Bills even. Let's talk about the positives before we get into the negatives. So, positives from the season. Number 1, let's talk about defense. We'll get into the defense in really good detail here throughout this podcast, this episode, but it was a massive jump from the defense. I don't think anybody could deny that. I think the worst game they had was probably against the Eagles in the first week, right? And I don't know if you guys are watching the Eagles game right now, but they look great against the Rams. They're probably going to win this game. Last year, again, DVOA, the Packers were the 27th ranked team in defense for DVOA. They jumped to 7th this year. That's a massive, massive improvement. Points per game was 10th last season. This season, they were 6th. Yards per play, 20th last year, 5th this year. EPA per play, which is an efficiency metric, 24th to 4th. Yards per game allowed, 17th to 5th. Last year, 21 turnovers. This year, 32. And the big one was the increase in interceptions. Just backing up really quick on DVOA. Last season, having the 10th ranked points per game defense, everybody knew that wasn't really how good they were. Baker Mayfield, perfect passer rating. Bryce Young had his best game ever. They got lit up a lot last season. And anybody who watched that team knew like the 10th ranked defense is not accurate. So that brings back DVOA. They were 10th in points allowed, 27th in DVOA. So again, massive improvement for the defense. A big reason why is the second positive for this team, the safeties. My God, Xavier McKinney. I'll give you guys a quick story. You'll hear a lot of predictions from me. We're going to talk about offseason. We're going to talk about a bunch of stuff. When they signed Xavier McKinney, I was in the middle of my work shift. I literally had told my boss I had a stomach bug or whatever, so I could take a lunch early, just so I could scream in happiness they signed Xavier McKinney. Anybody who's watched the tape, they watched Jeff Hafley's defense, which we'll get into in a bit. Xavier McKinney was the perfect fit, grade A, perfect fit for this defense. I thought for sure he was going to have an insane year, and he did. 8 interceptions this year, led the league. I think he was actually number 2 in the league. He made play after play after play after play. There were 6 games in a row they had a pick, which is unheard of. So he was an outstanding fit. He made a ton of great plays this year. He also you never really heard his name, which is kind of what you want in the defensive backfield, right? Like if you keep seeing somebody's name pop up, Kentrell Bryce, for example, or, pick your Packers defensive back from 2016. You hear their name a lot. Jarrett Bush from the mid-2000s, right? Somebody who's always given up plays. You never really heard Xavier McKinney's name. Never missed tackles. He's an all-pro, first-team all-pro. Fantastic signing. That's a big improvement. Evan Williams, 4th-round pick in the draft this year. They drafted Javon Bullard in the 2nd. We all thought he was going to be the one to take over, but you started hearing in camp all the buzz about Evan Williams making tackles, jumping plays, getting picks. He was the talk of all the beat writers in camp, and you saw it in the season. There was that game against the Rams. He had the 4th down stop in the end zone. He made that insane play on, I forgot who it was, on the read option against somebody. I forgot who it was. I apologize. Evan Williams was the top-graded safety, rookie safety by PFF. They basically just completely made over that safety room. Last year, again, Darnell Savage and I forgot his name, Rudy Ford. They had the guy, Simone Biles' husband. It just was a bad safety room, right? And Darnell Savage alone was an absolute garbage player. He had such a great start when he was in Pettine's defense, took a huge step back. So, again, huge improvement this year was the safety room. I mean, no one can argue that. Number 3 positive, Edgerrin Cooper. My God, Edgerrin Cooper. Pardon me. Edgerrin Cooper was literally a godsend for this team. He started making play after play after. He actually had a really good game the first game of the season against the Eagles. But you got the sense they didn't really trust him early in the season. And sure enough, we started hearing, he makes the splash plays from the floor. Makes the splash plays, but he doesn't really make the little plays. He needs to be better about the details, blah, 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 whatever. At the end of the season, I'll just say that Vikings game specifically, it was an unbelievable game. I mean, if it wasn't for Jared Verse having, 77 pressures this year, Edge Cooper would have been the defensive rookie of the year. He also got some all-pro votes as a rookie, which is insane. I mean, he was an absolute godsend. He's basically what we all thought Quay Walker was going to be. Pardon me. They just passed the eye test better this year. There were hats to the ball every time. They tackled better. One thing I will say here, let's talk about Jeff Hafley for a second. I didn't even know who the hell the guy was. If somebody on here can tell me if they actually thought if they knew who Jeff Hafley was, leave it in the comments. I had no idea who he was. I don't follow college football at all. Had no idea who he was. I'm over here like, yeah, sign some of the Ravens assistants. Had no the hell idea who he was. We didn't even get to see his defense this year, guys. He is a man coverage, get pressure with the front four, blitz when you need to type of guy. They played almost zero man coverage. They could not get pressure with four, which is why they had to blitz more than they did, and that's why they had to play zone coverage. They counted on Jair being here, which we'll talk about him at some point in the offseason where he's going to go. We didn't even see his defense, and they were a top 10 defense, in my opinion, top 5 defense. He absolutely blew my mind this year, guys. He's getting head coach interviews. For the love of God, please do not sign him, New York Jets. Keep messing up. Don't sign him. But, again, Hafley was an absolute godsend. I would argue, too, Hafley did something that Joe Barry, Mike Pettin, and so many other defensive coordinators the Packers have had in the past didn't do, which is he made adjustments, right? You saw it over and over again with Barry. They would have game after game after game after game where, they'd be playing 40 yards off on 3rd and 10. And, despite the same things happening every single – Preston Smith being in coverage. Everybody knows about that. Making jokes about CB1, right? Let's be real. Joe Barry was the worst at adjustments I've ever seen. The fact that Hafley didn't even get to run his defense, I mean, it's incredible what he did. And I think they're going to be unbelievable in 2025. They're going to be a top 5 defense this year. Just got to get some players to actually match the scheme. We had some issues this year with Rashawn Gary and getting pressure with 4. I mentioned that. We didn't really sign players that fit Hafley's defense outside of Xavier McKinney. The ones that did, like Evan Williams, Edgerrin Cooper, right? They were the best players on the defense. So again, massive, massive wins there on the defensive side. Excuse me, guys. I'm just doing a one take here, so I'll get better, I promise. Offensively is where we take a little bit of a different tone, right? Offensively, I said coming into the season, if the defense can be even just passable, they're going to win 12, 13, 14 games and be a Super Bowl contender. Offensively, it was just not the case. They were never that good this season. They just never got into a rhythm, right? Let's talk about the good things first, though. The run game was unbelievable. When we signed Josh Jacobs, I'm not sure if any of you guys followed last season. He was kind of injury-riddled last year. PFF, whether you like PFF or not, even if you just look at the eye test, he really wasn't that great last year. And I was like, wow, this is kind of a ballsy signing. And some of you that know me, Aaron Jones is one of my favorite Packers of all time. Probably Devontae first, Charles Woodson second. I'd probably put Aaron Jones third. So I kind of had low expectations for Josh Jacobs, but this was the most impressive running back season since 2003 Amon Green. Anybody wants to disagree, that's fine. Obviously, we have a right to our opinion, but this was a power run game, the likes of which I have not seen in Green Bay since 2003. They absolutely mauled people up front all year. They were diverse. They had multiple formations. They ran out of shotgun a ton. They did some wing T, that spin stuff against the Colts that we saw. My God, it was unbelievable to watch. The running game was absolutely blew away my expectations, right? And one of the reasons that they had such a good year statistically was the run game. So we'll talk about that in a minute. Offensive line was another major good thing from the offense. They only gave up 14 sacks. They were number 1 in ESPN's O-line rankings for pressure percentage. I think the Eagles' offensive line, the Lions, probably then the Packers, right? I think the Packers' offensive line blew my mind this year. And basically, they're getting all the returns. They're getting them all of them back next year, which, again, we'll talk about offseason and stuff another time. But the only guy they're going to lose is Josh Myers, and I think anybody who knows O-line play can kind of agree that's not the worst thing in the world. So as far as rankings go, huge jump. We were 4th in DVOA this year compared to 7th last year. Points per game went from 12th to 8th, and we also had an increase in yards per game as well. But like I said, something was just a little bit off. And I want to talk about Jordan Love. I think one of the most interesting things I've seen is the discourse around Matt LaFleur and Jordan Love after this. It is important to remember that if you really think Malik Willis is the best quarterback in this offense or Jordan Love sucks, you don't know what you're looking at. No disrespect. It is safe to say, though, Jordan did not take a step like we thought. He just objectively didn't meet the expectations, right? He was so consistent at the end of 2023. Despite the fact he started pretty poorly in 23, he finished as, in my opinion, he looked like the best quarterback in the league last year. He was a lot more consistent in 2024, I would say. He didn't have that horrible start like he did in 23. He did have some picks early this year, right? But overall, right, like I thought Jordan played a really, really good season. And I'll talk about it in a little bit as more things. But one of the other things that went wrong was the receivers did not improve like we thought. At the end of last season, I was probably most bullish on this receiving room. I was like, they don't need a number one receiver. This is the best receiver room they've had since 2011, right? I really did believe that coming into the season. I thought everybody was going to take a step. Reality is, guys, they just didn't, right? I was wrong. I think a lot of people thought the same thing. Which receiver really took a step? Leave it in the comments if you guys think of anybody who improved. I think Jaden Reed's probably the one you could argue the most on. Probably Christian Watson, too. I thought Christian Watson took a step, probably. But that's it. And Jaden Reed, his step was more at the beginning of the season, right? He was lighting teams on fire. I think he was leading the league in yards after like week 4 or 5. Just disappeared down the stretch this year. So number 2 here, what went wrong? Wide receivers didn't improve. Objectively speaking, that's just true. They did not improve like we thought they would. And growth isn't linear. We'll talk about that plenty in the offseason here. It wasn't what I was expecting. I thought they were going to end up with the best receiver room in the NFL. The third thing before we get on to Jordan Love is I thought they just had a really hard time getting an identity, right? They just had a hard time mixing run and pass. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but Jordan Love was insanely good this year in play action, but they didn't run a lot of play action. And the play action they did run was out of shotgun. And obviously we have to consider the injury as a reason for that, right? Jordan, he hurt his knee the first week. He had the groin injury against the Jaguars. I don't think he ever really got into a rhythm this year, but I also think it was because I don't think LaFleur really knew how to mold together a power run game with that finesse passing game, right? Let me know if you guys agree in the comments, but I thought it stood out pretty glaringly. They just didn't really have a good mix of run and pass, and I really hope that going into next season, LaFleur can take a good look in the mirror and say, hey, like, here's how we're going to do this, right? Now, number one question I'm sure people are getting, is Jordan Love still the guy? His final stats, 25 touchdowns, 11 picks. He didn't throw a single pick the final 7 weeks, I think, until the playoffs, of course. He was 7th in EPA per play. He was number 5 in QBR, ESPN QBR, which is, I think, a pretty good stat. He had some insane throws this year. A couple that jump out was the touchdown to Tucker Kraft against the Texans. I think it was 61.7 miles per hour, the hardest throw in the history of the NFL. And when we use next-gen stats. So, again, massive throw there. I mean, that was Favre-ish, I thought. The other one was the 4th down throw to Watson against the Cardinals. He threw it between like 3 defenders, which is insane. He had that really insane play against the Lions where he dodged like 3 pass rushers, juked him out, threw it to Watson. And, again, no picks the final 7 games. That's some really strong efficiency. And touchdowns, I think he had like 8 touchdowns in that stretch, right, which is not that much. But Josh Jacobs had like 10. So I think they kind of just decided, like, in the red zone, let's give it to the guy. Let's give it to 8. So I think he's still the guy. Why didn't we see the jump that we wanted to see? It goes back to what I said before about the wide receivers. They just didn't take a step. They did not get better like we thought they would. They just never really played the way they did at the end of last season. And conversely, neither did Jordan, right? Let's take it one by one. Romeo Doubs, I think he showed a lot better hands this year, right? He was a lot more reliable in that aspect, but a lot of drops still, right? His route running improved, but I just didn't see him take over like I thought he would, right? Going in back to training camp, Jair said he's the best receiver in the NFL, the toughest guy he's ever guarded. I think we kind of knew that was not true. But, I thought for sure, Dobbs might take a step and take over that number 1 receiver spot. I think he was better last year. I really think he was better last season. Jaden Reed. The way Jaden Reed finished last year, remember that play against the Bears, guys, where Jordan Love moved out to the left, threw that like sidearm between 2 defenders. Jaden Reed took it all the way across the field. Then there was that couple of those touchdowns against the Vikings last year. I think it was week 16. I mean, he looked unbelievable at the end of last season. And he looked great at the beginning of this season, but he just completely disappeared. If you guys watch the tape on it, which we'll do some tape stuff at some point too, Jaden was anybody who pressed him, he could not get off press coverage this year. It was pathetic. No offense. So he needs to be schemed open, which again, I think LaFleur can do that. But he had to get 17 drops or something, one of the highest drop percentages in the league. There's that play against the Rams that sticks out where, third down, drop right over the middle. You had that play against the Vikings where they went for it on fourth down. That could have changed the whole game, by the way. Dropped that one. Tons of drops on tape from Jaden. So he didn't take a step. Dontavian Wicks, my God. Dontavian Wicks, I thought he was going to end up being the number one receiver this year. He still got open a ton this year, right? He's an insanely good route runner, but he did not get his hands on the ball. He had so many drops, guys. Think about that Vikings game in week 4, I believe. He had so many drops in that game, and he just kept dropping the ball all year. He ended up getting a little bit more reliable at the end of the season, right? Still gets open at a high rate. I still think he has the highest ceiling of all the receivers. I think next year he might be the guy if he can hold onto the ball. But he didn't take a step either. He was much worse this year. Christian Watson, he got hurt, right? He had several games this season where I think he averaged 30 yards a catch the final 5 games he played, which is crazy. So I think he took a step, right? But he wasn't there when we needed him the most, right? At the end of the season when we needed to play our best ball, he wasn't out there. He was hurt again. And we're not going to have him probably till week 12 next season, right? And barring an insane recovery. And even if he does recover quicker than that, right, he's not going to be himself probably till the playoffs, right? So we can't rely on him. So let's talk about one other thing. So LaFleur in his final press conference, he highlighted an issue on route depth. And that's why he threw the pick to Zach Bond against the Eagles, right? He expected Tucker Kraft to be 15 yards downfield and said he was 10 or something like that. I think people just assume when a quarterback plays good or bad, right? It's all on them. It always has a lot more to do with the receivers than we think about, right? People isn't two-end touch, guys, right? When we're playing in the yard. I still remember at the Richland Raiders, old middle school, throwing balls out there at recess, right? Oh, get open, right? Just wait for somebody to get open, right? When you're one-on-one, get open. It just isn't like that in the NFL. Anticipation is a huge part of the passing game in the NFL. The routes that these receivers are supposed to run have to be precise. Jordan is throwing it where the guy's supposed to be, not where he is, okay? So a lot of times when you guys see inaccurate passes from Jordan, which he has plenty of bad ones that he has to take the blame for, right? It's because the receiver isn't where they're supposed to be, right? And that play with Malik Heath against the Eagles is a perfect example of that. The only reason that got picked off by Zach Bond, it looked like he threw it right at him, was because Malik Heath wasn't where he was supposed to be. Okay? So try to understand. The receivers last season, at the beginning of the season, played terribly, and that's why we saw Jordan Love look the way he did at the beginning of the season. They were constantly running the wrong routes. They're running into each other. There's some tape. If you guys want to look at some tape, go look at the All-22 against the Raiders last season. There were, I think, 4 or 5 plays where the receivers were just running into each other, running the wrong routes. Jordan had to eat it or run or whatever, throw it into triple coverage, whatever. The point is, guys, it's a symbiotic relationship between the quarterback and the receivers. It's never just on the quarterback. And I know I'm not trying to explain away the issues from Jordan, which we'll get there in a second. But, again, there's really just more to it than, oh, the guy is open, so he missed it, or, oh, the guy's not open, throw it away. There's a lot more to it. So, anyway, that's a huge reason why he didn't take a step back, or didn't take a step forward, I should say. The details matter, and this receiver room is still really young, guys. Jaden Reed and Dontavian Wicks, their second season. It was Romeo and Christian's third, right? Bo Melton, I think it was his third. Malik Heath, his second. Again, young players. Tucker Kraft was a huge revelation, right? I didn't get to talk about him earlier. Tucker Kraft was the most improved player on offense, in my opinion. And I think he's the guy next season outside of, I think Wicks will end up being the guy, and then whoever they pick up in free agency, which we'll talk about. Devontae Adams. I wish. Tucker Kraft is the guy they need to go to in those situations. You saw some of the catches he made this year. He gets open. He's got a lot of wiggle to him. He's an athlete. But they need him for his blocking, guys. That's the thing. It's almost to a fault. He's an insanely good blocker, And for that reason, they can't trust him to run routes. He has to block. Someone needs to step up. They need to get, in my opinion, they need a blocking tight end this offseason. But I think Tucker Kraft was the only person on offense that dramatically improved. So let's talk about Pat Mahomes really quick. Pat Mahomes this season, I'm not going to read the numbers, but go look at him. His numbers were worse than Jordan Love's, in my opinion. You don't hear anybody calling for Pat Mahomes' job. Because guess what? They all say, oh, well, he doesn't have any receivers. All of his receivers are hurt. Okay, I agree. Right? Jordan had the same excuse, in my opinion. His receivers did not pick him up this year. He did not have the jump from his receiving room that he needed. And in hindsight, they probably should have brought in a vet last year. I was one who didn't think they needed one. They probably should have. Every media pundit and every fan of the Chiefs, right, rightfully so, oh, he didn't have any receiver talent. That's why. You can say the same thing for the Packers receivers. I think they're insanely talented, but we didn't see that talent in 2024. We thought they'd take a huge jump. We thought that even if they played at the same level as the end of 2023, I think Jordan would have looked better. That's why we didn't see Jordan that we thought we would, okay? I thought he did a great job of avoiding sacks, but he did step up in the pocket and throw poorly. I thought his knee had a huge impact on that. He was very messy mechanically. He does have a bit of a long delivery at times. He throws a lot off his back foot. He throws F-it balls too much. I would say that's another thing. So he's not perfect, right? He's got a lot of work to do, guys. His mechanics are not where they need to be, right? His release is still long. But we saw that from Aaron a little bit too, right? He was a Tedford quarterback back in 2005, right? Held the ball up by his ear. If you guys go look at preseason highlights from 2005, yeah, dude looks like pretty goofy, right? So what we see now is a young quarterback who's still developing, and we've been extremely spoiled at quarterback for 30 years, right? I love Brett Favre, not as a person. I love Brett Favre in the field, not as a Viking. And I am the biggest Aaron Rodgers fan on the field as you can possibly be. Just because we haven't seen that same level from Jordan doesn't mean he can't get there. He has every bit as much talent as Jordan and every bit as much, or as Aaron, and every bit as much talent as Brett. But what we're seeing right now is not the final form of Jordan. And as long as his receivers take the step that I think they will next season, and also if they bring another receiver, a vet receiver, I think, we're going to see a massive jump from Jordan. I said it earlier, guys, growth in the NFL is not linear. We've been spoiled for 30 years. The level of play we saw at the end of last season is some of the best quarterback play I've seen since 2016 Aaron. The 2020 season of Aaron was insanely good too, but I thought a lot of that was scheme. What Jordan did at the end of last season, if you watch the highlights from the Steelers game all the way up to the 49ers game where, he definitely made some stupid mistakes at the end of that one. It was insanely high quarterback play and statistically speaking, one of the best stretches of all time. I think he can be better than that. So again, just because we didn't see him doesn't mean, he needs to be benched, trade him, cut him. He sucks. Jordan sucks. It is absolutely absurd and asinine. Anybody who thinks that, you don't know what you're looking at. No disrespect. You do not know what you're looking at. So we're going to see a much better Jordan Love in 2025. I can guarantee you that. Before we wrap up here, I just wanted to highlight what we're going to do in the podcast going forward. But before we do that, real fast, the off-season's coming. As far as what they need in the off-season, we're going to do a lot of off-season stuff. I'm going to record a podcast. I'm going to try to do 2 every week, guys. Off-season-wise, they need a pass rusher. They need an edge player. They did fire Jason Rubrovich, who was their defensive line coach last year, but he didn't coach the pass rushers last year. Okay, there was a lot of talk in the building about Rubrovich not really being the right fit for that job. He's a Joe Barry guy. He's the only holdover from Joe Barry, which should say a lot. There was not a lot of growth at all from the defensive line. Like the pass rush this year was just not good enough, right? All the pass rush we saw was from blitzes, creative stuff from Halfley. I thought Rashawn Gary picked it up at the end of the year. I think Brenton Cox and Lucas Van Ness did a pretty good job. There was a stretch there where they were getting, 17% pressure percentage, which is really good. Definitely, top tier. But I think they need another body there. That's the number one need that they have this offseason. Number 2, I think they need a receiver, which, again, blows my mind to even say that. But Christian Watson is a huge part of this team. He's not going to be there till week 12, right? Romeo Doubs, 2 concussions this year, right? Dontavian Wicks, you certainly can't count on him being a top flight guy next season, right? I think he can be. I think he could. I think he will be to make a prediction. But from what we saw this year, you can't base an entire offseason plan around Wicks. You're going to have to find somebody else. We'll talk about who that would be. We'll talk about options, a free agency preview here. That'll be the next episode. Number 3, I think they need a cornerback, right? Jair will not be back. I would be shocked if Jair is back. Absolutely shocked. With that said, even if Jair was back, I think they need to upgrade at corner. I think corner is going to be where they go in the draft. I think they could go in free agency. There's a couple guys I like, Travarius Ward, DJ Reed from the Jets. But we'll talk a lot about that as we go forward. I appreciate you guys listening. Thank you for bearing with me, episode 1. I promise I'm going to get better at this, right? Not coughing in the mic and breathing loud and heavy. Anyway, I think this season was a massive success, even though we didn't get as far. There was a ton of growth in the team. Next season is where the window opens. If anybody told me that the first 2 years after Aaron that we would have 2 winning seasons, 2 playoff appearances, I would have been ecstatic, and I know you would have been too. We got a little bit spoiled at the end of last season, 2023, and we expected a Super Bowl team this year, but reality is they're just not ready for that. But I can guarantee you, with all the money they have to spend this year, they still have all their draft picks. They're going to get more development from these guys that didn't take the step this year. Next season's when the Super Bowl window opens, probably for a 3 to 5 year window. So get ready, ramp up. We're going to have a good time previewing it this offseason. We're going to do a ton of draft stuff, ton of offseason stuff. But thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys in the next episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Appreciate you staying in.